Imagine coming home after a long day only to find your own driveway turned into a standoff by a man pretending he was in charge of keeping the neighborhood safe. That's exactly what FBI Tactical Commander Simone Kearns walked into, and what happened afterward would rattle an entire community. Her evening was supposed to be uneventful. She'd just wrapped up a late planning session at the FBI's Sacramento field office, her head still crowded with case notes, task lists, and the follow-up she needed to push through. By the time she steered her SUV off the main road and toward Fairgrove Estates, a gated community in Elk Grove, her thoughts had already shifted to tomorrow. A 7 a.m. run, her daughter's school drop-off, and a noon briefing she had to lead. Nothing in her calendar hinted at trouble. But danger doesn't wait for an opening. It shows up uninvited, and in this case, it was parked right in her path. She pressed the small gate remote clipped to her visor, watching the iron barrier slide open, then cruised past neat two-story houses with trimmed lawns and glowing porch lights. Her townhouse, sitting on a corner lot shaded by a maple tree she had fallen in love with when buying the place 3 months back, was just ahead. But as she slowed in front of the driveway, her stomach tightened. Someone was already there. A man stood firmly planted across her concrete as if it belonged to him, arms folded, posture rigid. The reflection of her headlights caught the neon vest he wore, but what really froze her was the holstered pistol on his hip. Instinct told her instantly, this man wasn't law enforcement. His stance was too casual, too sloppy for anyone with proper training. Simone eased the SUV to a stop and lowered her window halfway. "Evening," she said evenly, tone calm but clipped. "Can I help you?" He stepped forward, taking position directly in the center of her drive. Mid-50s, stocky frame, salt and pepper buzz cut. The vest across his chest bore a stitched name in bold, Douglas Brinton. His first words came out flat, not like a greeting but like a challenge. "You live here?" "Yes," Simone replied without hesitation, one hand already reaching for the garage remote, ready to prove she belonged without sparking an argument. But Douglas didn't budge. Instead, his fingers began to tap lightly against the grip of the pistol riding in his holster. "This is private property. Residents only, and you don't look familiar." Simone's jaw set, not in anger but in controlled focus. Men like him weren't new to her. She'd stared down hostage-takers, unstable suspects, cornered cartel runners. What rattled her wasn't his tone, but the fact that she was facing this same kind of intimidation mere steps from her own front door. "I'm no outsider," she said evenly. "I'm your neighbor, Simone Kearns, Unit 314. Her words were calm, but her right hand drifted toward her purse, not for a weapon, but for the badge inside. If this escalated, she was ready to show him exactly who she was. Douglas leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Never seen you at any HOA meetings. Around here, we keep tabs." Simone released a long, controlled breath, letting silence stretch. But she wasn't the only one aware of the tension anymore. Curtains shifted along the street. Porch lights flicked on, one after another. The neighborhood was waking, watching, judging, some maybe even recording. "I just finished work," she said, voice steady. "Now, if you wouldn't mind stepping aside, I'd like to park my car." Douglas let out a dry laugh. Then, without warning, his hand unclipped the holster and dragged the pistol halfway free. The metallic scrape cut through the night, freezing everything in place. "You'll need more than polite words," he muttered. Training took over. Simone's heartbeat slowed, her breathing regulated. No flinch, no fear, only analysis. The twitch in his left hand, the uneven stance of his feet, the way bravado tried to cover uncertainty, all told her exactly what she was dealing with. Armed, yes. Dangerous, yes. But sloppy. Behind him, shades shifted. Neighbors whispered through glass. A phone screen glowed. She heard it. Someone murmuring across the street, "He's got a gun on her." For a fleeting second, she pictured how it must look. This stocky man with a weapon towering over a woman boxed into her own driveway. One wrong move and it could turn fatal. She leaned a fraction out of her window, her voice cool, cutting. "Mr. Brinton, you're pointing a weapon at a homeowner. That's not just reckless, it's a crime. Lower it, now." Douglas only shook his head. "You don't belong here," Douglas growled. "Folks like you don't just slip into a place like this without drawing attention." I'm the HOA safety chair. It's my responsibility to keep this community secure. Secure. The word cut like irony. Simone had spent 20 years training federal agents to defuse crises, safeguard civilians, and keep entire cities safe. Yet here she was, standing accused as a threat in her own driveway by a man who saw nothing but his own prejudice. The silence stretched, every tick of the clock dragging into eternity. Simone's fingers brushed against the smooth edge of her badge holder. She wasn't ready to reveal it, not yet. Not until he was calm enough not to turn this into a disaster. But patience had limits, and Douglas was scraping against every last one of them. Her gaze swept the neighborhood again. Curtains shifted, porch lights blinked on, shadows of neighbors leaning closer to their windows. Cameras glinted. She wasn't just defending herself, she was being judged, recorded, turned into a story that would ripple through every backyard conversation, every church gathering, every HOA potluck. None of that mattered. Only one thing mattered. The barrel of a gun rising higher, steadier, leveled at her chest, and the man holding it, blinded by suspicion, too reckless to see who he was truly threatening. Before Simone could decide, flash the badge or step out to take control, Douglas shifted closer. This time, the weapon cleared the holster completely. No pretense, no half-drawn intimidation. He gripped it with both hands, sights locked on her windshield. The street fell into a chilling hush. The only sound was the whisper of oak leaves rustling at the corner. A car rolled by, slowed, caught a glimpse of the scene, then sped away. Simone knew she had seconds to anchor the moment before it spun out of control. Slowly, deliberately, she rolled her window all the way down and leaned forward. Careful to avoid sudden movement, "Mr. Brinton," she said, voice measured and commanding, the same voice she'd used in hostage negotiations from hotel corridors to underground garages. "You're aiming a loaded weapon at a resident. Lower it now and we can talk." Her tone wasn't pleading. It carried authority, the kind forged in years of crisis, cutting through the night air like steel. She was trained to strip the panic out of her voice, but Douglas still didn't lower the gun. His jaw worked, eyes sharp, his tone cutting. "Don't try to run a game on me. I've walked this block every night for 3 years. I know every face that belongs. And yours? Never seen it. Not once." Simone's focus dropped to his hands. The weapon wavered, not steady, not controlled. His trigger finger floated dangerously close, twitching with each breath. He wasn't law enforcement. He was a man cosplaying soldier, convinced he was the shield of the neighborhood. But the lack of discipline made him twice as volatile. Her voice lifted just enough to carry toward the porches where she knew ears were pressed against doors. "My name is Simone Kearns, Unit 314. I purchased the townhouse 3 months ago. I live here. Check the property records if you doubt me, but this ends now." The steadiness in her words only seemed to rile him further. His nostrils flared. "Don't feed me lies," Douglas snapped. "You think spitting out a number makes it real? You don't belong here. I know who's who, and you aren't one of them." Across the street, a cautious voice broke through the tension. "Doug, maybe she does live here." Douglas's head whipped toward the sound, the pistol swinging with it. "Stay inside, Sharon. I've got this under control." The sight made Simone's chest tighten, an armed man flinging his weapon toward shadows in the windows. A loaded tragedy waiting to detonate in the middle of a quiet cul-de-sac. Her tone dropped lower, steady as bedrock. "Douglas, I am not your threat. You don't need that gun pointed at me. You need to holster it now." For a second, the words touched something in him. He hesitated, teeth grinding, caught between instinct and ego. Then his chin lifted again, pride holding him hostage. "You don't get it," he muttered. "I'm the safety chair. I keep crime out. I know what trouble looks like." Simone pressed her lips into a hard line. Trouble. That was the word he clung to, even as he stared at the least threatening person on the street, an exhausted woman returning from work, branded danger for nothing more than existing. From her purse came a faint buzz. Her phone, maybe her daughter, maybe a colleague. She didn't reach for it. Not with a gun still wavering inches from disaster, कोई भी तेज हरकत गलत समझ ली जा सकती थी, इसलिए उसने अपने हाथ नजर में रखते हुए स्टीयरिंग व्हील पर रखे। "तुम मुझे नहीं जानते, डगलस," उसने कहा, लेकिन आवाज में ठंडक थी। "मगर सुनो, अगर तुम आज रात गोली चला दोगे, तुम्हारी जिंदगी वैसी नहीं रहेगी जैसी तुम सोच रहे हो। नीचे करो। तुम कैमरस के सामने खड़ा हो, गवाहों के सामने, कानून के सामने। उसकी नजर फिर से घरों की तरफ झंक गई। वैसे भी 2 फोन्स फेंस के पीछे उठे हुए थे। छोटी लाल रोशनियां ब्लिंक कर रही थीं। रिकॉर्डिंग का आवाज़ उस पर दरकर सा महसूस हुआ, पर उसका ईगो पीछे खींच नहीं रहा था। ये मेरा इलाका है, तुम घुस आई हो, उसने दोहराया, आवाज अब थोड़ी कमजोर, खुद को मनाना जैसे। फिर सिमोने धीरे से, बिल्कुल संभाल कर गाड़ी से उतारी। दोनों हाथ खुले और दिख रहे थे, कंधों तक थोड़े ऊपर। चाहती हो क्या सबूत? उसने कहा। मेरे पास कीज हैं। और फिर उसने गराज रिमोट दबाया। धीमी सी आह के साथ गराज का दरवाजा उठा और अंदर की मोशन लाइट पहले पीली रोशनी से खाली गराज को ढक गई। पोर्च से एक हल्की सी आवाज उठी। हर कोई देख रहा था। डगलस की आंखें थोड़ी सी पीछे हटीं। बैरल थोड़ा नीचे आया। बस बटन से क्या सबूत मिल गया? तुमने वो रिमोट चुराया भी हो सकता है, उसने घात से कहा। सिमोन की सब्र की लकीर पतली हो गई। तुम यहां बिना वजह हलचल कर रहे हो, उसने तीखी आवाज में जवाब दिया। मरेको डेको डगलस, मैं अपनी ड्राइववे में खड़ी हूं, अपने गराज के सामने। तुम ही हो जो बंदूक उठा के खड़ा है। तुम्हारे पास इस तरह का हक नहीं है। उसका चेहरा सख्त हो गया। हॉ ने मुझे यह जिम्मेदारी दी है, डगलस ने नाराजगी से कहा। सिमोने थासी से हंस पड़ी, हैरानी से ज्यादा थंडाक। जिम्मेदारी? तुम एक चाली हुई आदमी हो जो एक फेडरल एजेंट के सामने एक झटके से गोली चला सकता है। उसकी आवाज ने अब पूरी कदर में हुक्म चलाने वाला रंग ले लिया, वैसा ही जो उसने कभी हॉस्टेज नेगोशिएटर के तौर पर इस्तेमाल किया था। सुनो अच्छी तरह, वो बोली, गली में सख्त। तुम एक निर्दोष रहने वाले पर बंदूक उठाए खड़े हो। यह जुर्म है। अगर तुम इसे नीचे नहीं करते, तुम उसका हिसाब देने के लिए तैयार रहो, और वो हिसाब तुमने अब तक जो सोचा भी नहीं होगा। The neighbors' whispers grew louder. From across the street, a man called out, "Doug, maybe back off. She just opened her garage." But Douglas's face flushed red. Backing down in front of witnesses wasn't an option for him. Pride locked his fingers tighter around the gun, and the more Simone challenged his false authority with truth, the more his anger swelled. The standoff dragged on, each second stretching like an eternity, a test of who would blink first. Porch lights across the street blazed down like stage lamps, casting Simone and Douglas in a scene neither had rehearsed. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice, then fell silent, sensing the weight in the air. Simone's breathing stayed steady, her eyes fixed on the weapon. Douglas's arms trembled slightly, fatigue creeping in, but he clenched his jaw, desperate to keep the act alive. His voice sliced through the silence. You're too calm. Nobody stands this still with a gun in their face unless they're hiding something. Simone tilted her head, her tone calm yet edged with command. Or maybe I'm calm because panic won't save either of us. Think about that. The words landed. Douglas blinked, his grip faltering for a second before he forced himself steady again. He wasn't expecting pushback this smooth, this fearless. He expected trembling, begging. Instead, he found composure, and it rattled him. On a nearby porch, a young man whispered loudly, phone in hand. She's not even flinching. She must know what she's doing! Douglas snapped his head toward the voice, the gun swinging dangerously in that direction. Stay out of this! Everyone get inside! He barked. Gasps rippled through the street. The weapon was no longer pointed at Simone. It was scattering across porches, dangerously close to innocent lives. Simone's voice cracked through the moment, firm and commanding. Eyes on me, Douglas. Right here. You're waving that weapon all over the block. Do you realize how reckless that is? You nearly aimed it at your own neighbor's child without even knowing. For the first time, Douglas hesitated. His lips pressed into a thin line. No words came. A man who had spent years barking orders at HOA meetings suddenly found himself speechless, shaken by the truth staring him in the face. Not wanting to be corrected by someone who actually understood the language of authority, Simone's fingers slid over the leather of her badge holder. She could reveal it now and end the charade, but she weighed the danger. Flash it too soon and he might panic, convinced she'd tricked him. Wait too long and he could sink deeper into rage. So she tested him instead. You keep claiming you're the safety chair, she said, voice even. Tell me, Douglas, what training do you have? Who certified you to carry that weapon? Who taught you how to de-escalate a fight? Her questions cut through the bluff like a knife. "I don't need training," he snapped. "I've lived here 15 years. I know who belongs. I don't need a piece of paper to spot a liar." Simone's jaw tightened, but she didn't bite. Everyone watching understood the implication. She let the silence sit before she continued. 15 years and you've convinced yourself you're a one-man police force. The truth is, you're brandishing a gun in front of the families you claim to protect. What happens if your finger slips? His nostrils flared, his face coloring. "Don't put this on me. You're the one who wandered in," he shot back. Simone's tone went sharp, not loud, but cutting through his posturing. "Douglas, I belong here. More than you know. I'm calm because this isn't the first time a weapon's been pointed at me. But it is the first time the person holding it looks this unprepared." The neighbors' murmurs swelled. "Unprepared, and what does she mean?" someone asked. Another whispered, "She sounds like law enforcement." Douglas sneered, yet his grip slipped again, sweat beading at his temple, his bravado cracking. Simone stepped forward almost imperceptibly, voice steady. "If you fire that gun, it won't just be me. You'll have to answer for what you do. There are cameras, there are witnesses, and there's a law that doesn't bend for HOA votes." Simone's hand moved slowly to her purse. Deliberate and visible, every motion a signal meant to keep him from panicking. "I'm going to show you something, Douglas. You'll want to see it before you make another mistake." His voice jittered now, though he tried to keep it hard. "Don't try anything. I'll shoot if you move." Simone eased the leather case from her bag and held it flat, palm up, so everyone on the porches could see. The gold badge caught the street light and flashed, a small, undeniable sun in the night. "I'm Special Agent Simone Kearns, FBI Tactical Command, Sacramento Field Office. I live here. You are pointing a firearm at a federal agent and at a neighbor. You are one breath from destroying your life." The porches erupted in stunned gasps. Phones angled, zoomed, and the hush broke into a ragged chorus. "She's FBI. Oh my God!" Douglas stared as if the badge had struck him. His mouth open, closed. The grip on the pistol eased a fraction, though the barrel still tracked Simone. "You're lying," he muttered, weak, hollow. The crowd's attention had shifted. The man who had tried to cast himself as protector now looked like the aggressor, an armed stranger pointing a weapon at one of the nation's most trained officers. Simone didn't step forward. She didn't have to. The badge spoke for her. But instead of collapsing, Douglas stiffened. Pride reasserted itself. His finger twitched toward the trigger, not away. The tension climbed when it should have fallen. For a beat, the whole street seemed to hold its breath, the badge bright in her palm, the gun clenched too tightly in his hand. He should have lowered it, acknowledged his mistake, walked away. Pride, however, is a hard fire, and Douglas's pride would rather burn the house down than admit he'd been wrong. Douglas's grip warped under pressure, his hands trembling, the barrel wavering left, then right, unable to settle. On both sides of the street, parents clutched their children, some yanking them inside, others frozen, compelled to witness. The night air felt stretched, tight as wire, between Simone's steady composure and Douglas's unraveling bravado. "You think that little badge scares me?" Douglas spat, his voice pitched louder, playing to the porches and curtains. "This is my neighborhood, not yours. Flash all the shiny metal you want, it doesn't make you belong." Simone's tone cut through, cold and immovable. "That badge means I've faced armed men in real firefights, moments that make this look like a playground. It means I've stood between civilians and shooters and walked away alive. You want control, Douglas? Look at your hands, they're shaking. Everyone here can see it." Her words weren't only for him, they were for the witnesses, for the cameras capturing every second, for the story neighbors would repeat tomorrow. She was calm, measured. He was unraveling. Across the street, an older man in flannel shouted, "Doug!" She showed proof. "Put the gun down before you do something you can't undo." But Douglas didn't hear it or refuse to. His eyes burned into Simone, now lit not with suspicion, but humiliation. "You think you can just walk in here, pull rank, and embarrass me in front of my people?" He barked, face blotched red, the weapon bobbing dangerously. Simone held her ground, voice level, unshaken. "Nobody humiliated you, Douglas. You did this yourself. You pointed a gun at your own neighbor. And now everyone sees the truth. Stop it here before it gets worse. Lower the weapon. That's your only exit. But her calm only stoked his fury. He wanted fear, trembling, submission, something to justify his crusade. Instead, she stripped him bare in front of his own stage, his jaw clenched, his pride blazing, and the muzzle rose, centering on her chest. Gasps rippled down the block, sharp and jagged. A woman's voice cut the night. "Doug, don't you dare!" Simone's mind spun through options with precision. If he fired, she was close enough to lunge, trained enough to redirect. But the fallout wouldn't stop with her. The ricochet, the panic, the stampede of neighbors could turn this cul-de-sac into a war zone. She needed to snap him out of his spiral without forcing the trigger. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, her eyes locked unflinchingly on his. "Look at me. You're pointing that gun at someone who's trained men half your age to keep their composure under fire. You are out of your depth, and you know it." Douglas's breath hitched, his finger twitching dangerously against the trigger guard. One wrong syllable could end everything. Simone dropped her voice to a whisper, steady but piercing enough for every porch to hear. "You want control, Douglas? Then prove it. Show your neighbors you can control yourself right now. Show them you're not the threat here." The words struck deeper than he expected. His eyes blinked fast, sweat stinging as it slid down his temple. His arms sagged, just a fraction. The crowd murmured, sensing the tension shift. For an instant, the barrel dipped. Relief flickered, but pride surged back like a current. His face twisted, his voice raw. "You don't get to lecture me. I built this committee. I'm the one keeping this street safe when the cops don't bother to." Simone's tone hardened, her words cutting clean through his delusion. "Safe? You're aiming a loaded weapon at a federal agent in her own driveway. There's nothing safe about that. You are seconds away from prison, or worse." Douglas's jaw locked, lips curling into a grimace. Veins bulged along his neck, his body trembling between two choices: accept the truth or double down in front of his audience. He was unraveling. Then a voice cracked the night, panicked, desperate. "Someone's already called 911. The cops are on their way." Douglas's eyes darted, fear flashing sharp for the first time. His grip wavered, the barrel dipping slightly. Then, in a desperate claw for control, he jerked it back toward Simone, and in that split second, she saw it. The mistake. Douglas's hesitation cracked the air wide open. His weakness was visible now, a tremor in his grip, a flicker in his eyes. Simone planted her stance, badge glinting under the porch lights, her voice firm with finality. "You've crossed every line tonight, Douglas, but you still have one choice left. Put the gun down and walk away with dignity, or keep pointing it and lose everything you claim you're protecting." The crowd held its breath, neighbors whispering prayers, others muttering curses, but every eye was fixed on Douglas Brinton, a man drowning in his own pride, clutching a weapon he had no business holding. Before he could act, the rising wail of sirens shattered the night. The sound grew, cutting through the quiet suburb like a blade. Red and blue lights washed over the houses, strobing across windows and throwing the cul-de-sac into sharp, pulsing shadows. Neighbors flinched, some ducking inside, others raising their phones higher, eager to capture what came next. Douglas's face twisted between anger and fear, his pistol jerking in his trembling hands. For the first time, he realized the stage wasn't his anymore. The cameras, the witnesses. The narrative had slipped away. Two squad cars skidded to a stop at the mouth of the cul-de-sac, tires grinding against asphalt. 4 officers spilled out, weapons raised, voices booming in unison. "Drop the gun! Put it down now!" For a moment, Douglas just stared, stunned, as though the orders couldn't possibly be meant for him. Then he turned toward the flashing lights, the pistol still in his grip. That motion detonated panic across the street. Children screamed. A neighbor shouted, "He's going to shoot!" Officers braced, fingers tightening on triggers. "Don't you dare point that at them!" Simone's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, not pleading but commanding. She shifted just enough, lifting her badge higher into the strobes so the officers could see. "FBI Tactical Command," she declared, her voice iron. "The armed suspect is Douglas Brinton, HOA chair. I'm a resident and a federal agent." The street froze again, caught. in the razor edge between collapse and control. He's been threatening me with this weapon for several minutes. The word FBI cracked across the street like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd, neighbors whispering it under their breath, disbelief mixing with shock. The officers froze for a beat, their eyes darting between Simone's badge and the trembling barrel of Douglas's pistol. Douglas's face twisted, outrage colliding with panic. "She's lying. She's making it up," he stammered. "That's not real. She doesn't live here. I know who belongs here, and she doesn't." A tall officer with a steady, unshakable tone cut through his rant. "Mr. Brinton, drop the weapon, now. You are pointing a firearm at a federal agent and a resident. This is your final warning." The words hit harder than the sirens. In that moment, Douglas wasn't the protector anymore. He was the suspect. The armed man under flashing lights, the one cornered in front of dozens of witnesses, every shaky movement captured on glowing phone screens. Pride warred with fear, but pride dies hard. "I was doing my job," Douglas shouted, his voice breaking, chest heaving. "I was protecting this community. She doesn't belong here." "Protecting them?" Simone snapped back, her disbelief sharp enough to cut glass. "You nearly leveled that gun at a child 2 doors down. You waved it at your own neighbor's wife. That's not protection, Douglas. That's reckless endangerment. You turned a quiet street into a crime scene because of your ego." His eyes darted to the porches, desperate for support, for someone, anyone to nod, to defend him. But the faces staring back weren't loyal. "They were horrified. She almost died," a woman whispered. "He's lost it," another muttered. From across the street, a man shouted, "This isn't safety, Doug. It's insanity." The officers advanced, commands overlapping now, voices hard and urgent. "Drop the gun! On the ground now!" Douglas's arms shook violently, the pistol bobbing between surrender and defiance. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, the weapon dipping, then lifting again like it was tethered to his stubbornness. Simone locked eyes with him, her voice deliberate, measured, cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. "Douglas, listen to me. You can go down as the man who admitted he was wrong and put the gun away, or as the man who pointed it at an FBI agent and left in handcuffs, or worse. Is that really how you want your neighbors to remember you?" The words hung like a blade. Silence pressed in from every porch, every camera lens. Douglas's grip shook violently now. He looked less like a protector and more like a drowning man thrashing against the tide, fighting when all he had to do was let go. At last, a sound ripped from his throat, half growl, half sob, and the pistol dropped. The clatter against the driveway rang sharp, final. The officers surged in instantly. One booted the weapon out of reach while another wrenched his arms back, steel cuffs snapping shut. Douglas shouted, wild and desperate as they hauled him toward the squad car. "You're making a mistake. She doesn't belong here. She tricked all of you." But his protest collapsed into the night, drowned by flashing lights and the heavy silence of neighbors who had seen the truth unfold with their own eyes. Simone exhaled for the first time since it began. A steady release then slid her badge back into her jacket. She stood not victorious, but solid, unshaken, resolute. One of the officers approached carefully. "Ma'am, Agent, you all right?" She gave a short nod. "I'm fine, but you'll want statements. And there are cameras. Plenty of them." The officer glanced at the row of glowing windows where phones were still lifted, lenses glimmering like watchful eyes. "Looks like half the block caught it." "Good," Simone said evenly. "Then no one can twist the story." The crowd stirred louder now, not whispers but open voices. They weren't questioning her anymore. They were questioning why Douglas had been allowed to walk these streets armed, self-appointed as a guard no one had asked for. But though Douglas Brinton was finally in cuffs, the real fight wasn't over. Because the fallout from this night would split the neighborhood wide open. The flashing lights didn't fade, they multiplied. Within minutes, 2 more patrol units rolled in, followed by a supervisor's SUV. The cul-de-sac was no longer a quiet street. It had become a scene straight out of breaking news. Douglas Brinton sat on the curb, wrists cuffed tight behind his back, his face twisted with rage. The reflective stripes on his vest caught the flashing lights, glaring like a warning no one wanted. He refused to stop yelling, his voice cracking against the night air. "This is wrong! You don't get it. I was protecting this neighborhood. She doesn't belong here." "Enough, sir," an officer snapped, one hand pressing him down firmly but not harshly. "You're finished until we get your statement at the station." Douglas jerked once, but the fight had drained from his arms. All that remained was his anger, spilling out in broken shouts no one was listening to anymore. A few feet away, Simone stood with her hands clasped in front of her, posture steady, expression controlled. On the outside, she was calm. Inside, her pulse was still recalibrating from the last 10 minutes, the razor's edge where violence had almost cut through. And she knew this story wasn't finished. A sergeant approached, flipping open a small notepad. He looked weathered, late 40s, lines carved at the corners of his eyes. His tone was clipped but respectful. "Agent Kearns, can you walk me through exactly what happened?" She nodded, voice even. "I pulled into my driveway. Mr. Brinton was blocking it. When I identified myself as the homeowner, he accused me of trespassing. He drew his weapon, threatened me, and ignored repeated commands to de-escalate. I displayed my credentials, but he continued to aim his weapon until your units arrived." The sergeant scribbled quickly, glancing up now and then. "And you've lived here? How long?"
3 months.
"Unit 314, purchased in June. Title's in my name." He gave a slight nod. "We'll confirm with HOA records, but I believe you." His eyes flicked toward Douglas, who was still shouting hoarsely to the crowd. "She's lying. She's making this all up. You'll see." One of the younger officers turned back to Simone, his voice steady. "Ma'am, you did exactly what you should have. Your restraint probably kept this from ending in tragedy." Simone gave a small, controlled smile. "That's my job. Unfortunately, tonight, it followed me home, around them. The neighbors who had once watched in silence began edging closer, voices rising, bolder now that the danger was cuffed and sitting on the curb. Now that Douglas no longer had the gun, the whispers on the block swelled into heated arguments. A woman in a gray hoodie leaned toward her husband and muttered, "I always thought Doug took this security stuff too far." A man nearby, phone still clutched in his hand, shook his head hard. "Too far?" He almost shot her. He was waving that gun around like it was a toy. But not everyone agreed. From a porch across the street, a voice cut through the chatter. "Doug was just doing his job." "Somebody has to keep watch around here. You don't know the kind of people moving in these days." The sergeant's head jerked toward the heckler, but Simone spoke first, her tone calm yet edged with steel. "Looking out for people doesn't mean pointing a gun without training. That's not security, that's intimidation. If you want safety, it has to come with responsibility, not paranoia." Her words rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others dropped their eyes uneasy. The tension hadn't disappeared, it had only shifted. From Douglas's gun to a deeper divide about what safety really meant in their neighborhood. One officer moved up and down the sidewalk, collecting phones from neighbors who offered their recordings. Another began scribbling down written statements. The sergeant turned back to Simone. "We'll log the weapon, check his permit, and notify the DA. My guess? Assault with a deadly weapon, menacing, maybe reckless endangerment. But I'll be honest, some of these folks still think he was protecting them. This could get messy." Simone didn't blink. "Messy doesn't change the facts." He pointed a loaded gun at a federal officer standing in her own driveway. "Every camera here caught it. The truth isn't negotiable." The sergeant gave a short grunt, snapping his notebook shut. "We'll be in touch. In the meantime, I'd suggest locking your doors. Looks like some of your neighbors are about ready to turn this into a shouting match." He wasn't wrong. The noise was rising again. A man with arms folded tight barked, "Doug's not the villain. He's the only one who gave a damn about keeping us safe." From the opposite side, another neighbor shot back without hesitation. "Safe?" He pulled a gun on a woman in her own driveway. "That's not protection, that's insanity." "Cared?" He pointed a gun at a mother in her own driveway. "That's not caring, that's madness." One man shouted. Simone didn't answer. She let the neighbors clash, their voices rising into a split chorus. She didn't need to argue. The truth was already sealed in the cameras, in the gasps, in the silence that had fallen when the badge came out. Still, she couldn't ignore the fracture forming in real time, some defending Douglas out of loyalty, fear, or pride, while others finally exhaled relief that someone had stood up to him. The sergeant cut the night short, waving his officers back to their cruisers. Douglas was yanked to his feet, wrists locked tight behind him, still thrashing with words. "You'll regret this. I kept this place safe." "You're all blind!" The door slammed on his rant, muffling it into the back seat of the squad car. The neighbors lingered in clusters, uneasy, whispering, watching Simone with mixed expressions. Some drifted close, offering hushed sympathy. "Glad you're all right. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Others held back, arms crossed, eyes hard, unwilling to let go of the story they'd built around Douglas. But Simone knew the real confrontation wasn't flashing lights or raised voices. It would come later, when the HOA and every family on this block had to face what they'd just witnessed. The patrol cars pulled out slowly, red and blue strobes fading into the distance. Douglas's muffled shouts vanished with them. For the first time all night, the cul-de-sac was still. No sirens, no weapon in play, just neighbors left with the weight of what had nearly happened. Simone stood by her SUV, arms folded across her chest, badge tucked back into her jacket. Outwardly calm, but inside she felt the familiar crash after adrenaline, the restless, heavy hum she knew too well from past standoffs. Except this wasn't a case file or an operation. This was her driveway, her home. A voice broke the quiet. A man in his 60s shuffled closer, slippers scuffing the pavement, pajama pants hanging loose. His throat cleared awkwardly. "Agent Kearns, I didn't even know you lived here." "You do now," Simone said gently, softening her voice. His gaze flicked nervously toward the spot where the gun had clattered only minutes earlier, as if trying to reconcile the suburb he thought he knew with the one that had just revealed itself. Where Douglas had stood minutes earlier, a neighbor lingered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Doug's always been loud at the meetings," he muttered, "but none of us thought it would ever get this far." Simone tilted her head. "Didn't you?" He wore a vest, strapped on a gun, patrolled the block like a sheriff without a badge. "Nobody questioned that?" The man hesitated before exhaling heavily. People grumbled, sure, but some liked it, said it made them feel safer. Until tonight, Simone echoed, her tone flat. He gave a stiff nod, murmured a quick goodnight, and shuffled back to his porch, leaving behind only the fading scent of cut grass and cooling asphalt. At the corner, a cluster of neighbors argued in sharp whispers. One woman hissed, "I told you Doug was taking things too far. He nearly shot her." Another snapped back, "He was protecting us. You don't know what it's like being alone here at night." A third cut in bitterly, "He pointed a gun at the wrong person and made us all look like fools." Simone caught every word, but didn't insert herself. This wasn't her fight to win. It would unravel in HOA meetings, neighborhood chats, and the comment sections of videos already uploading online. Not everyone kept their distance. A younger man in his 30s approached, phone still in hand. "Agent Kearns, I recorded the whole thing. If you want it for your report, I'll send it over." Simone's eyes softened. "I appreciate it. That recording may be the reason the truth sticks." He nodded and slipped back to his porch, where his wife stood clutching their toddler close. Then came the confrontational ones. A woman with folded arms and a pinched scowl marched across the street. "If you really lived here, people would have seen you around more. Doug had every reason to be suspicious." Simone turned slowly, posture steady, voice controlled. "Ma'am, I work 12-hour shifts with the FBI. I leave early, get home late, and spend my spare time with my daughter. I didn't realize attendance at barbecues was the requirement for belonging here." The woman's glare lingered a moment longer before she turned sharply on her heel, retreating to her porch. From the crowd, a man muttered under his breath, "She's right. Doug went way too far." Way too far, Simone thought. That was putting it lightly. He had almost turned her driveway into a crime scene. One by one, porch lights dimmed, curtains slid shut, and neighbors drifted inside. Some murmuring apologies, others stiff with anger, divided between loyalty and pride. When the last cruiser's taillights disappeared, Simone was left standing alone in the glow of her garage light. The stillness of the night didn't comfort her. Her phone buzzed, a message from a colleague. Heard what happened. You good? She typed back quickly. Safe. Shaken, but safe. Sliding the phone into her pocket, her eyes returned to the spot where Douglas had stood, gun trembling, finger too close to the trigger. For 2 decades, she'd drilled agents on keeping steady under fire. Tonight, that very discipline had kept her alive, on her own front lawn. She locked the SUV, stepped into her garage, and hit the button to close the door. The rumble echoed louder than usual. Leaning against the panel as it shut, she took one measured breath before straightening again. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, questions, fallout. Tonight offered only silence. Silence heavy, with a neighborhood deciding whether they had just seen their protector unmasked as a danger, or their danger revealed beneath the mask of protector. Either way, Simone knew the reckoning wouldn't stop here. The HOA would have to face it openly, and the next meeting, it was already destined to be explosive. Less than 48 hours later, that prediction came true. An emergency session was called. Word spread like fire. Emails flying, text chains lighting up. Even flyers taped to mailboxes by a neighbor convinced paper still carried more weight. By Thursday evening, when Simone stepped into the HOA clubhouse, the tension hit like a wall. The room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, metal folding chairs set in uneven rows, a makeshift stage for what promised to be a battle. Chairs were crammed into uneven rows, but it wasn't enough. More than 60 people packed the clubhouse, far beyond the usual 20 who trickled into HOA meetings. Dozens stood along the walls, arms crossed, phones in hand, waiting to capture whatever came next. At the front sat the board, 4 uneasy faces shifting papers, avoiding the eyes of the crowd. Margaret Dwyer, the chairwoman, a silver-haired woman in her 70s, tapped the gavel against the table. The sound was sharp, but her grip trembled. Order, please. Let's get started. The chatter quieted, though not completely. Simone chose a chair in the middle row, deliberately placing herself where she couldn't be ignored, but not at the head of the room either. She hadn't come to command the spotlight, but she knew before long it would find her. Before the board could even begin introductions, a man shot to his feet, Tommy Brandt, one of Douglas Brinton's most vocal defenders. His arm slashed the air as he shouted, "Douglas was protecting us!" He's the only one who ever cared enough to walk this neighborhood at night. And now he's rotting in jail like some thug while the real criminals run free. That's the disgrace. Scattered cheers erupted from a corner of the room, but a woman's voice cut in just as quickly. A disgrace? He nearly shot a neighbor. He aimed a loaded gun at a federal agent in her own driveway. The room fractured into shouts. He didn't know she was FBI. Someone called. That doesn't matter. Another snapped. She told him she lived here and he still kept his weapon up. The gavel cracked against the table again. Margaret Dwyer's voice strained to rise above the chaos. Enough! We will not talk over each other like children. Everyone will have their turn. The noise ebbed into uneasy murmurs. Margaret's hand gestured toward the center of the room. Agent Kearns, since this incident concerns you most directly, perhaps you should address the board first. Every head turned. The focus didn't rattle her. Simone rose deliberately, smoothing the crease of her jacket sleeve, then stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice cut clear through the tension. Not loud, not rushed, but steady, sharp enough to silence the whispers. I never intended to stand before you under circumstances like this, Simone began, her voice carrying evenly across the restless room. I moved here to give my daughter and myself a home, a safe one. But on Tuesday night, instead of safety, I was greeted by a neighbor pointing a loaded gun at me simply because he decided I didn't belong. The room hushed further, the weight of her words settling. For 2 decades, I've trained federal agents in how to de-escalate armed encounters. That I had to draw on those skills in my own driveway is unacceptable. Real safety doesn't come from untrained residents with firearms patrolling like vigilantes. It comes from trust, accountability, and responsibility. From the back, a man scoffed. Easy for you to say, you've got a badge. Simone's gaze cut toward him, calm and unwavering. That badge didn't keep me alive Tuesday night. My discipline did. And the only reason you aren't mourning a neighbor on the evening news is because I knew how to stop one man from making the worst mistake of his life, murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. For a long moment, no one else spoke. Then a woman slowly rose. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied with conviction. I used to think Douglas made us safer. But when I saw him waving that gun, I realized he wasn't protecting anyone. He was feeding his own need for control. We all saw it. The atmosphere shifted. Douglas's defenders squirmed, scanning the room for support, while others straightened, emboldened by her words. Margaret Dwyer struck the gavel. This board will vote tonight on Mr. Brinton's removal from the safety committee. We will also consider a motion banning armed patrols by private residents. From here on, only licensed security or law enforcement will be authorized. The declaration triggered another eruption. Shouts about personal rights clashing with calls for common sense. The board members looked pale, overwhelmed. Yet momentum was clearly shifting. Simone let the noise churn a moment before lifting her voice again, firm but steady. You have a choice. Do you want safety built on paranoia and intimidation, or safety built on trust, community, and responsibility? Or safety built on trust? Simone finished, her voice cutting through the rising noise. Because what happened in my driveway could have been any one of you, or worse, your children. And next time, there may not be someone trained enough to stop it. The statement landed hard, like a stone breaking the surface of still water. The ripples spread through the room, softening the shouting into uneasy silence. Margaret cleared her throat, her voice wavering. The vote will proceed. But Simone knew paperwork wasn't the true turning point. The real verdict was already working its way into the neighbors' minds, changing how they'd see each other from that night forward. When Simone finally closed her front door that evening, the echoes of the meeting followed her inside. The arguments, the finger-pointing, the desperate defenses of Douglas, they churned in her thoughts like voices that refused to quiet. She set her keys into the ceramic dish by the entryway and leaned against the wall, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Her daughter was spending the night at a friend's, and the silence felt like both comfort and weight pressing against her chest. For 2 decades, she'd learned to leave tension behind when walking through her own door after field assignments. Tonight, it had followed her in. Her phone buzzed on the counter. The name on the screen was familiar. Agent Marcus Bellamy, a colleague from her academy years. She answered, putting it on speaker while pouring a glass of water. You holding up, Simone? Marcus's voice was steady, the kind that already knew the answer. I'm fine, she replied automatically, though her tone betrayed her. She took a sip of water and set the glass down. I've had guns aimed at me before, Marcus, just not in my own driveway. There was a pause, the kind where silence carried more weight than words. You want to talk it through? He asked gently. Simone lowered herself into a chair, eyes fixed on the faint scratches etched into the kitchen table's surface. He looked at me like I was an intruder in my own life. Didn't matter that I had the garage remote in my hand. Didn't matter that I gave him my address. None of it mattered. He made up his mind the second he saw me, Simone said softly. That's what lingers, the judgment. Nothing I said or showed him mattered. Bellamy's sigh came through the speaker. Pride and fear, a dangerous mix. But you handled it the only way you could. You kept him from crossing the line into a mistake that would have wrecked everything. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass. I kept myself alive, sure. But what if it hadn't been me? What if it was one of the other women on this street just coming home late after a shift? Would they still be here? Or would we be mourning, calling it a misunderstanding? Her voice caught, frustration finally bleeding through. You can't carry all of that, Bellamy said gently. You did what you had to do. You saved yourself, and maybe you saved the next person too by pulling the mask off him. Simone swallowed, her throat dry. I came here for peace, for a stable place where my daughter could grow up without looking over her shoulder every time she walked down the block. And instead, the man claiming to protect this community nearly turned it into a crime scene. Silence stretched before Bellamy finally spoke. You know what real protection looks like. That's why it stings so much to see people confuse paranoia for safety. But don't forget, you showed them the difference. You gave that neighborhood a lesson they won't shake off." A humorless laugh escaped her. "Some lesson. Now half the street doesn't know if they should thank me or resent me." "Let them figure it out," Bellamy replied. "Truth has a way of settling even if it burns first." Simone leaned back in her chair, eyes tracing the ceiling. "My daughter once asked me why I stuck with this job for so long. I told her it was because someone has to stand in the middle when things go wrong. But I never thought I'd have to stand in the middle of my own driveway. That rattled me." "You're allowed to admit it rattled you," Bellamy said quietly. "You're not carved from stone." Simone let her eyes drift shut, drawing in the quiet, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the fragile comfort of sitting inside a home she had nearly been denied by one man's arrogance. "Thanks, Marcus," she murmured into the phone. "Anytime," he replied. "And Simone, don't let this place take your peace. That's yours. Don't hand it over." When the line clicked dead, she remained still, the silence pressing around her. Her thoughts drifted to the neighbors, the ones who had spoken up, the ones who had defended Douglas, and those who had hung somewhere in the uneasy middle. She thought of her daughter, blissfully unaware of how close her mother had come to disaster that night. And she thought of the decision she'd made, not to draw her own weapon, not to escalate, but to trust her training and her voice. It had kept her standing, and it had stopped Douglas from pulling a trigger he could never take back. But Simone knew this wasn't over. The true story wasn't just her survival, it was about what her neighbors chose to take from it, whether they faced the truth or buried it. The following days carried an odd rhythm. Word spread past Fairgrove Estates, first whispered in gossip threads, then picked up by local blogs and soon echoed on regional news. Video clips recorded by neighbors made their way across social media, drawing thousands of views. Some were outraged that a woman could be cornered in her own driveway, gun leveled at her. Others brushed it off, calling Douglas's actions a misstep. For Simone Kearns, it was never about clicks or headlines. It was about the choice Douglas made when he let suspicion override reason, and the choice she made not to meet force with force. On a quiet Saturday morning, she stepped onto her porch, coffee warming her hands, and studied the street that had nearly become a crime scene. Children pedaled bikes again, hedges were trimmed, sprinklers turned lazily in the yards. Neighbors lifted their hands in greeting, though some gestures carried hesitation. Beneath the calm, she could still feel the fracture, the split between those grateful for her composure and those bitter that she had exposed the man they once trusted. Her daughter stepped out onto the porch, ponytail loose, eyes bright with the unfiltered curiosity only teenagers seem to have. "Mom, people at school are talking about you." Some of them watched the video. "They can't believe you stayed so calm, with a gun pointed at you." Simone allowed a small smile. "Staying calm is what kept me alive, and it's what kept him from throwing his life away too." Her daughter frowned. "But why would he even think you didn't belong here? You live here, you pay the bills. Why wasn't that enough?" Simone took a slow sip of her coffee before answering, her words deliberate. "Sometimes people don't see the truth in front of them. They see what they want to see, fear, assumptions, pride. And when those things mix with power, real or imagined, they can turn into something dangerous." The girl's gaze dropped to the porch steps. "That's not fair." "No," Simone agreed softly. "It isn't. But that's why we can't answer anger with more anger. That's why we use our voice, our judgment, our training. Because if I had let his fear control me too, we wouldn't be standing here having this talk." The words lingered heavy between them. Slowly, her daughter nodded. Later that week, the HOA distributed the results of their vote. Douglas Brinton stripped of all committee positions, armed patrols permanently banned. The announcement was wrapped in dry, bureaucratic language, but the meaning was unmistakable. Change had been forced upon them by one night that almost ended in bloodshed. Yet Simone understood the deeper shift couldn't be written into bylaws. It had to be lived, taught, remembered, passed along. She wanted her neighbors, and anyone who had seen the viral video, to understand this. Real safety doesn't come from paranoia. It doesn't come from pointing weapons at people who don't match a narrow idea of belonging. It comes from restraint, from responsibility, from knowing when to act and when to stand down. That belief had guided her through 2 decades with the FBI, and it was the same principle that had carried her through the standoff in her own driveway, without a single shot fired. When a local reporter later asked her about it, Simone answered with the same steadiness. She put it in the simplest terms. Safety isn't born from fear, it's born from judgment. Fear makes a hand reach for a weapon. Judgment knows when to leave it holstered. That distinction saves lives. The reporter scribbled notes as fast as his pen would move, but Simone didn't add more. She didn't need to. The truth stood on its own, plain and undeniable. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to settle into uneasy normalcy. Some residents avoided her gaze, ashamed or conflicted. Others stopped by with hushed thanks. A few acted as if nothing had ever happened, hoping silence might wipe away what the cameras had already captured. But Simone didn't cling to the bitterness of that night. What she carried forward was the clarity of its lesson. Fear will never build a safe community. Only trust, accountability, and responsibility can. That was the story she wanted remembered, not just in Elk Grove, but anywhere people thought suspicion alone could create security. And it's a lesson for all of us. When fear tempts you to judge someone before you truly know them, pause. When pride urges you to win an argument at the cost of another person's dignity, step back. And when you think authority is about control, remember that true strength is restraint. Because the real danger that night wasn't Douglas Brinton's gun. It was the fear and pride that convinced him to draw it. And the real protection Simone Kearns carried wasn't her badge. It was her judgment, steady enough to know when to stand firm and when to hold the line. That's the truth this story leaves behind. If you followed it to the end, don't just take away the shock of what happened. Carry with you the reminder that in every heated moment we face choices. Choices that determine whether things unravel into tragedy or resolve into survival. And if you want more, stories that reveal these kinds of truths. Stories that challenge us to think about the world we live in and the decisions we make, be sure to subscribe. Because safety isn't about shouting the loudest or wielding the biggest weapon. It's about steady judgment applied when it matters most.